Your current role is you're a partner at Revolution and you lead the growth investing practice there, but you've been involved in venture capital for more than 2 decades now. What have you changed your mind on in the last decade and maybe every decade?
I just mean there's a ton of it. At the beginning of my career was probably far more analytical about things like market size, competitive analysis, and so forth. And today, I spend a lot more time understanding the psychology of founders, because what I haven't seen people grow more of is truly talented founders. That is really the differentiator.
In what ways did you see the founder evolve?
Being much more aware of the temperament and coachability and adaptability of founders is something I spend a lot more time on today than perhaps I did at the beginning of my career.
What jobs are becoming obsolete quicker?
I now believe that, at least for the short term, any job that requires you to sit most of the time is at risk. The velocity of job obsolescence is extraordinary. Tools have made it easier for mid and higher level engineers to complete work that they would historically have delegated to others. The first iteration is quite good. You simply cannot replace someone's taste or their judgment. You're not going to get Bohemian Rhapsody from an AI.
Todd, Klein, welcome to We the Builders.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Your current role is you're a partner at Revolution and you lead the growth investing practice there.
That's correct. Yes.
But you've been involved in venture capital for, I'd say, about more than 2 decades now.
That's right.
And so my first question is, I usually, ask these questions towards the end, but given your experience, I just wanted to start off with this. What have you changed your mind on, specifically in investing, in the last decade and maybe every decade?
Sure. I, at the beginning of my career, was probably far more analytical about things like market size and competitive analysis and so forth. And today, I spend a lot more time understanding the psychology of founders and their personality and their temperament. Because capital has become so commoditized, it's easy to get a company started and going in a sector that's, developed a lot of attention and people are really interested in. And so a lot of very similar looking companies get started to chase those opportunities. But what I haven't seen people grow more of is truly talented founders. That is really the differentiator. And so being much more aware of the temperament, coachability, and adaptability probably is the right word, of founders is something I spend a lot more time on today than perhaps I did at the beginning of my career.
You brought up that capital has become a commodity. What do you mean by that?
I just mean there's a ton of it. And so for every sector, there's a specialty and there's a lot of specialties. So you have funds that focus only on ag or a certain type of ag, right? Or only on defense. And these are not like little $25, $50 million funds. These are very, very big funds. And so the specialization, the amount of capital that's come into the industry itself is really unprecedented. And so if there was a time when you had real generalist funds of scale. Now you have specialist funds of scale. And that makes a big difference. And so sectors get funded very quickly by very capable investors that are highly focused. So that's what I mean by the commoditization of it. Plus you have an entire sectors built around buying secondary positions in these deals. And so there's just, in the ZERP environment, a ton of money was chasing yield and it came into the space. And so, there are a number of firms that exist today that is 4 or 5 times, certainly when I started my career. And that's what I'm referring to.
You also brought up that there probably, when some of these sectors, become more desirable, you have a lot of people going after that same sector. It could be, defense in one given year. It could be agriculture in a given year, or
Yep.
well, this given year could be AI,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but do you believe I think you referred to the fact that there are not enough good founders, which is why you're more interested in the psychology of the founders, and you've pivoted your beliefs to that. So if capital has become a commodity, is it like almost not as relevant?
I wouldn't say it's not as relevant.
Right.
It's just there's an asymmetry in terms of the availability of capital, particularly again for sectors that are in favor, and the really special capabilities of an individual. You just can't recreate founders as fast as you can have capital flow into a sector, right? The really, really gifted, talented ones. So, for example, when we first put capital into Cava, it was 7 units. It's over 300 now. What we didn't know at the time was whether or not the CEO could adapt himself to scale and to change the way he led. And if you talk to Brett Schulman, he will describe in very explicit detail 4 personality transformations that he had to go through personally to get to running the business as it exists today. That's a very rare individual, both with the capability to do it and the self-awareness to recognize the need to do it. And those folks don't grow on trees, right? And so that's what I refer to. I don't think, when I refer to capital as a commodity, I'm not disparaging capital itself or allocators and the like. It just makes the job harder to really figure out who it is that can take something from a relatively early stage, something that's scaled, because they themselves must change.
That's a very fair point. In what ways did you see the founder evolve and change to become the person to be able to lead that company?
Sure. The folks that I've observed that are really, really good at that are able to take whatever that micro focus was that they had at the very, very early stages, and to create a system where others could do specialization within their own organizations and then lead that group, right? They went from doers to really good delegators and communicators, both internally and externally. And again, many of the people who start a company, they're really passionate about it. There's something that really bugs them that they want to fix in the world, right? And they're exceptional at addressing that problem. And then it starts to work, and more people recognize the problem exists. And so they want to expand the business. They want to scale it. Well, the ability to bring people in, lead them, direct them, give them enough room for them to develop professionally, and to do that at massive scale, that's a whole other skill set. And often, certainly one of the lessons you asked about lessons that I've learned is often the very traits that a founder has that make them exceptional early are the things that hold them back as the business scales. So for example, the ability to focus on detail and to go really deep quickly. That's great. That's really great. Except when a business gets to a certain size, that's not what they should be doing. They should be doing other things, particularly external things. And so the shadow side becomes what holds them back. And the best founders I've found can let that go and build a business through others.
So learning to delegate over time and knowing what details to get out of, and I guess like developing some sort of prioritization, evolving prioritization framework as the company grows.
Yeah. Building systems where others can thrive.
Right.
And managing those systems. That's a unique skill. And often when you bring folks from bigger organizations into your company, because you think, oh, it's time for a grown-up, the problem is those people often fail because they actually didn't build the systems. They inherited the systems and they try to impose whatever they inherited on that situation. So, the few individuals, and it's not just the founders and CEOs, they have to bring in folks around them who can scale themselves and scale those systems. That's a very rare asset.
My next question is, what have you changed your mind on in the last year?
So I don't know that I would use the word changed my mind, but I would say my thinking has evolved regarding the workforce. And so I now believe that at least for the short term, any job that requires you to sit most of the time is at risk, right? If you're up off your feet and doing stuff, either interacting with another person or actually physically building something, the threat of AI is a little different for you. But if your job only requires you to be off your feet, you have to think about the velocity at which that could change. And I think the speed that's happening in the last year, I would say, is an evolution in the way I think about the impact and the absorption of technology. I think, we've talked about before that I serve on the board of a local university here. And I didn't go to the university, but I was compelled to join the board because I think one of the biggest societal problems that we face is the velocity of job obsolescence, right? I mean, for most of human history, the pace at which a job change was measured in decades or lifetimes, or even more than that. But within, say, the last 5 years, the velocity of job obsolescence is extraordinary. So if you think about kids who started as computer science majors 4 years ago, their entire concept of job continuity and the like has transformed, particularly at the entry level. So I would say in the last year, the pace at which all that's happening is my thinking has evolved dramatically in that regard.
What jobs are becoming obsolete quicker?
No, I think it's harder for entry-level developers to find work. That's clear.
Is it because companies were already bloated, like partially that, versus how much of it is that, yes, you're very supercharged and, maybe engineers can do more?
Yeah, I think the tools have made it easier for mid and higher level engineers to complete work that they would historically have delegated to others. Because the analysis and the checking and the description and iteration process of some of that work really benefited from interacting with another junior person. Whereas I think many of what people perhaps sarcastically refer to as vibe coding, nowadays has actually gotten to the point where the result that comes from it, the first iteration, is quite good. And therefore the inefficiencies that existed maybe 2 or 3 generations ago in some of the AI tools we're talking about, those inefficiencies are rapidly becoming eliminated. And that's a real challenge for an entry-level person. They have to find other ways, and they themselves must become facile in these tools in order to add value in the organizations that they look to join.
I think I was looking at this data about a year or so ago, but maybe 2 years ago, there was an over-indexing on college-going kids majoring in computer science in the last 30 or 40 years. And that is course correcting.
Yes.
And so in a way, probably software as an industry or this profession shouldn't have gotten as big. Is like my takeaway.
Well, you can say that in hindsight, right? But if I'd asked you this question 24 months ago,
right,
would you have told me that software was an industry that was too big?
Correct. Yes.
No, I'm just asking because most people would not have said it's not too big. They might say it's got a little big, during the pandemic, and he was correcting, but
I would have said the first time I said this was pre-ChatGPT launch in 2022 when we were in the middle of a crypto bubble.
Right.
That was the first time I had this thought that and SaaS was still overfunded.
Yeah.
So that's the first time I had this thought that software has gotten too big.
Well, I hope you shorted all these SaaS stocks because you wouldn't be having to do this. You'd be on a beach somewhere. If you,
I know, I did not.
But yeah, I mean, I think the magnitude is what's maybe a little different now.
I think what you're alluding to is correct, that the velocity is going to be different than any prior era.
Yeah.
And that is going to be interesting to see in in what gets valued more as the tools you have allow you to do more.
Yeah.
I would hope positive impact, and I hope people, focus on thinking for themselves more.
Well, that's the key, right? So we were talking about Hollywood and what impact some of these technologies will have on that. You simply cannot replace someone's taste, right? Or their judgment. And these are tools, but human beings have to interpret them. And so I agree with you that there is a chance to use these tools and to have discernment around them and to create opportunity. So I'm not a pessimist. I do believe there will be dislocation, but I'm definitely not a pessimist. I believe these tools they have potential to create a tremendous amount of good and tremendous amount of wealth and those things. But you have to rely on human beings to utilize them, right? It's the only way to differentiate it.
That has been my thesis so far. Maybe when we do this again in a year or two, we could both be completely.
Well, again, I think maybe we talked about it before, but my example was always Bohemian Rhapsody, the song Bohemian Rhapsody, right? That song, first every record executive thought it was a terrible song, right? The idea that you were going to have an operatic rock song by some, relatively not dominant rock band, okay, with German language sung in it and multiple different movements like an opera would have. The idea that any AI could create Bohemian Rhapsody is an absurd. It could never do it based on anything that ever came before it. Yet it's probably one of the most influential rock songs that was ever written, right? And it's in movies and people singing it, and it's known worldwide. So you're not going to get Bohemian Rhapsody from an AI. And so if you want to be optimistic, think about all of these things that you just can't imagine where they came from until they're here. That's sort of, the way I interpret it.
It's interesting you brought that up, because that means the value of original work and the value of artists is going to increase by an order of magnitude we haven't seen before in any era.
It has that potential for sure. As long as people are unable to capture the value that they create, and it's not immediately distributed across platforms where it's, commoditized.
Right.
But to the extent that you do get to utilize that which you have created and enhance it and expand it by virtue of these tools, then it could be fantastic for artists.
Another thing you brought up was that if you're on your screen,
if your work is only on your screen.
If your work is only on your screen, then you should really think.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we're doing this in person.
Okay.
That's why. That was one of my theses that we in person is going to become more and more valuable, and not just podcasting or I guess. I think one of the other things is that in-person experiences, since COVID has had some impact on that, where people were trapped inside, and their hunger and appetite for just being outdoors and experiences or events just skyrocketed. But now, when there's even more incentive to be kept on the screen, I think there's going to be some sort of reversion. And how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's tough. I think that there are just some things that can only be learned in person, and there's some human development that can only occur live, in my opinion. So this is where
I agree.
This is where I get myself into trouble. I mentioned that I serve on the board of a local university. It's a fairly large university, and I used to joke that higher education, and this is the part that gets me in trouble. I used to joke that higher education is the worst bundled product in the world, okay, given its cost. And here's why. It's a bundled product that includes education, right? Good. Credentials, yes. And camp, right? It's basically those three things.
Right.
Okay. And the reality is the credentials and the education have become distributed
Commoditized.
and commoditized. But what I'm coming to realize is the most important part of it is the camp.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The fact that you have to learn to deal with each other and you actually can create other things better together and physically together. So I get less grief about that, criticism than I used to, because people I think are starting to value it more. But it's a lot to ask of folks, right? It sometimes costs more to do stuff together,
Yes.
right? You had to travel here,
yeah,
right? You have a crew here. They're very talented, right? They might have preferred to sit and do this from their home desktop in their pajamas, but here we are. So, and I'm willing to bet you that this will be better.
Oh yeah, 100%.
At least marginally so. I'll do my best, but it's marginally going to be better here than if we did it over Zoom. And so
and I've been talking to a lot of people who do interviews over Zoom, who do podcasts over Zoom, and you're just unable to match energy.
Yeah,
You can't intervene the same way. You cannot be back and forth the same way. It's just not the same.
Yeah.
But on the university part or higher education part, I agree. I'm biased though. I'm biased because I just think higher education is broken overall. But the camp part is the only I think the most valuable part of that entire experience is the camp part that you brought up. So in the next, institutions don't get disrupted overnight. So this is probably going to be a decades long process, but more camps are going to start doing really, really well. Because if credentials and education are commoditized, then the value of camps just increases, and then people are going to look for new camp. Like, why do you want to stay in a camp for 6 years or 4 years? Well, you can stay in a camp for a year, or 6 months, or 2 years.
Flexibility there that matches people's needs and their career ambitions and aligning those.
Right.
I do agree that flexibility is necessary for the role that traditional higher ed has played to evolve. I totally get that. But the other thing I've learned serving on that board is that everything that's going on in society, for good or for ill, whether it's sociological, whether it's economical, whether it's mental health related, whether it's political, shows up on a college campus first, right? It's a laboratory where all of that appears. And it appears with high degrees of emotional energy and a lot of passion, maybe not fully formed ideas and fully formed levels of passion, but it shows up there first. And so if we're going to figure out how our society is going to evolve, those places, which I am perhaps misinterpreting, pejoratively referring to as camp, are very important, right? They're really important because this is where it gets sorted out. You don't want people sorting out their social concerns in places where it's not a laboratory and there isn't safety and violence is a potential aspect of it, right? That's a bad thing. And we've seen what that happens when it looks violent, right? We've seen that happen recently when people are sorting these things out, on things like immigration and other things, in environments where, the boundaries, there's no expectation of boundary, right? In an environment like a college campus, at least for the most part of the recent past, there is a certain expectation that the environment will include some tolerance. If you take that away, it's not good for our society, I don't think.
In the short term. So what you're saying is that it's not just a laboratory for science and technology. It's a lab for your philosophical beliefs. It's a lab for culture, microcultures.
Our society, it's the human experiment, right? That's what's also going on there, right?
What are some recent in your recent memory, microcultures that developed out of college campuses that went mainstream?
Be more specific. What are you thinking of?
It could be anything, because you're saying that this is where you've seen that, these experiments happen where people sort of use that use the permissionlessness of the college campus to test their different ideas and, and also understand what they stand for and don't stand for and learn, through those experiences. So what are some like movements that started as just, these smaller echo chambers within college campuses and grew into larger social movements?
It's a good question. I don't know where, you have think about a lot of the social movements that have happened, for example, in the social justice world, right? Many of those began on college campuses, right? And, I've lived in Washington. You pointed out that I've been at this a while. When I began my career in Washington, there was no Native American museum on the mall. There was no African American museum on the mall. And there was no memorial to Martin Luther King on the mall, right? Many of the things that came out in terms of the evolution of our society and the equity that's been inculcated in our society, certainly in this last couple of decades, a lot of that started in college campuses. And that would be an example where, people were just expressing themselves and their concerns about how our society operated and who was left out and who wasn't, that, have had a positive effect. So those are maybe potential examples.
Well, I can only think of in terms of technology because Tinder started out on a college campus.
Well, so did Facebook.
And Facebook.
So did Facebook.
Facebook is another one.
A lot of the social networks began there. If you want to talk about a laboratory, it was, dejected people trying to connect with others and solve a problem. Right.
Right.
And that's an excellent example.
Back home in Pakistan where I grew up, I don't know if it's the same case in the US, but Uber's main go-to-market strategy was college campus programs. Yeah. One of the biggest strategies. And so I guess like we can also trace it back to some of the new technology movements that, or maybe it's the other way around where they used colleges as a tool for propagating.
Maybe, but a movement. Like I can tell you that as part of Cava's early growth plan, they tried to locate by colleges. When they went to LA from Washington, which was 3,000 miles away, one of the first places they went was right by a college campus, because these are first adopters. They are the individuals who are trying new things and not necessarily set in their old ways. And they're curious, and whatever it is that's happening in their lives that they're trying to manifest, they're going to look for new chances to do that. And so it's not just things like Uber, and you're right, or Facebook. It's food trends and stuff like that as well.
While we're on Cava, you served on the board of Cava, a company you invested in. Tell us more about the company. Like, what does Cava do? And I have a few follow-up questions there.
Okay, sure. So Cava is the largest Mediterranean fast casual company in the country. So early on, they were sort of tagged as the Mediterranean Chipotle. That was sort of the catchphrase that people stuck on them. And to a certain degree, there's truth there. But it, like a lot of things, started out with three friends who were of Greek extraction, who got too old and their mother stopped cooking for them. And they wanted their traditional food, but they wanted it in a way that matched their lifestyle.
Right.
And their lifestyles were very busy. They didn't have a ton of money, so they wanted something that was affordable. And they built this business on those ideas.
That might compel me to start a chai company or something.
There you go. You should. That would be a perfect example where people would just get it when they wanted it. Whatever the Starbucks of chai is, would be potentially compelling.
But would then the chai stay as authentic becomes the question.
Oh, you have to be committed to that, right? You have to be committed to it.
So how did Cava stay committed to that? How did they make sure that the authentic recipe of...
So they're all company owned stores. That's step one.
Oh, interesting.
Right. They didn't franchise because they just felt like they wanted to control the product that way.
Right.
And
that is really hard to scale.
It's really hard. And so they just made the decision to grow more slowly. Right. And so what they would do is, so they started out with a couple stores here, like one store, 3 stores. And when they had about a half a dozen stores here
Here you mean
DC, to DC,
right?
where they started, where they could control their supply chains and they could control quality and they could visit, etc. Then they decided, well, okay, we're a hometown hero. It's working. Let's try a new geography. That was like the first big test. Now, if you ask them if they would do it this way again, they would probably say no. But the second market they opened was Los Angeles, right?
All across the other coast.
3,000 miles, right?
Right.
And I think that, in their most honest moments would say that was a mistake. And what they ended up doing to address that mistake and to the adaptability point that I mentioned at the beginning is one of their founders moved out there,
to LA.
right? And moved there and just camped out for a year to establish what they needed to establish from the standpoint of quality and expectations and customer service and all the things that matter. I mean, they always thought of themselves first as a hospitality company, right? So they have been adopters of technology, but not necessarily anything that would change the sense of hospitality that someone might get. So when they designed their app, for example, it's meant to be essentially to mimic the line because that's what people were familiar with, and it was quick and it was efficient. But anyway, the key to the maintenance of what you described is a lot of focus and relatively slower growth. I remember early on also. So for example, I think maybe we had been investors maybe a month or two. And
can you also walk me through the thesis of the investment?
The thesis was people, the most threatened commodity in their life was their time.
Right.
Right. At the same time, they wanted healthier choices and they wanted more savory and flavorful choices. So if you believe that that's what people are seeking, and you have a saturated market, say in Mexican food, which is wonderful, but there's a lot of choices there, both at a national level and a local level. There aren't that many sectors that have real greenfield, and Mediterranean was one of them. And these were authentic people who knew the cuisine. So that was really the thesis that you could. And when we looked at the stores, the economic model worked based on a certain footprint, et cetera, and a certain offering. Like you couldn't offer 30 different choices. You could offer a set number. Like if you were willing to do that, it was broad enough. That's how they thought about it working. But I remember early on, they had built this plan out. We had invested behind it. Everybody's very excited. And then we had a board meeting and the founders came to us and they were just really distraught about, they had signed up a supplier, a yogurt and dairy supplier who, when they just decided to do a spot check, at their farms, it was clear that they were mistreating the animals. And these guys were like, they were sort of brokenhearted about it. And they said, we built this economic plan and we presented it to you and we just don't want to be in business with this person. It's like, it just really, it hurts here. And we're like, well, find another supplier. Like if it hurts you culturally, then that's going to show up in the way our employees behave with customers. Right. So part of this also with the secret with these guys was being extremely, careful about their culture early, like committing to a sustainable, growth-oriented, but high standard culture and not compromising, which meant you had to grow a little slower. You needed a certain kind of store manager who treated employees a certain way, respected the food a certain way, thought about waste a certain way, like all of those things. This is where AI can help, but it can't replace a certain commitment to customers and to their experience. So that's how we thought about building the company.
Fascinating. Did they have experience in hospitality or running a food business?
They had started a higher end restaurant, like a fine dining restaurant.
I see.
And so they had a sense of what would work. And it was also that was interesting at the time when they wanted to blow out this other larger business. They brought in a fourth partner who had some more traditional business experience to help them. And we had a choice as investors when we did the first deal, which was, Do we force them to sell those fine dining restaurants to us? Do they wrap it up altogether? How do we treat that business? Because it's a different economic model. And I think what we did turned out to be the right decision ultimately. And we said, well, you keep those businesses. Okay. They're, you have a lot of passion around them. They were the legacy that got this other thing started that we're trying to scale.
And they informed the experiment.
But yeah, whatever you learn in those kitchens, we hope you'll bring it to the company. Right.
Yeah.
We want you on the board. We want you in the board meetings. And the only requirement that we set at the time was, if for some reason we need to buy the name, we have to control our brand. That was the only restriction we put on them. If they wanted to build another restaurant, they could do it. But as long as, their aligned interests were with ours about scaling this thing, and whatever they learned about ingredients and the like they brought to us, it worked. So that was how we handled it. And that was really important to the culture, right? That's the hospitality first culture. We just didn't want them removed from that.
Fascinating. Well, you shared an example of, I guess, as being on the board, what the role is, but can you expand on, you're also on the board of George Washington University, you mentioned a few times, and you serve on multiple other boards. So what makes for a great board member?
Oh, well, you might ask others. The way I think about board service is like the core question is, what altitude are you flying at? Right. There are some board members that like to get very much in the weeds, and they believe they are a real substitute for the management team. That is not the philosophy, I hope. I'm there to make sure there's alignment of incentives, that we collectively design a vision and a set of goals for the company, and that we're tracking toward them. So, part of my monitoring responsibility and my governance responsibility is to make sure that the appropriate incentives are in place for the team. And that if I see problems with leadership, that I'm honest about it and transparent about it, so that it can be addressed. And if there is a plan that's laid out, it's my job to ask, did we hit the plan based on what we thought it would cost us within the scope that we set out for ourselves and within the timeframes that we established, that we all agreed on? Mm-hmm. And if we didn't, why? And how do we diagnose that? And how do we problem solve around those sorts of things? And so I think good board members ask questions and probe and help serve as a genuine sounding board for the CEO. So I've certainly found that founders have the loneliest job in the world. Mm-hmm. They truly don't have peers in their own organizations in most cases. They can have really close relationships and co-founders and so forth, but the CEO role in particular can be a very lonely job. Mm-hmm. And that gets worse, for example, if the company outgrows another founder or something like that. Mm-hmm. They just don't have anyone else to talk to. And as long as we can hear those concerns without panicking or freaking out, or trying to get in and solve things, then we're doing our job. Now, there are times when you have to really help and grab an oar. So in Cava's case, for example, when the pandemic hit, our business dropped 80% in 5 days. And so there needed to be a lot of hands-on. So we created subcommittees of the board. Mm-hmm. I had a role, for example, in dealing with our real estate leases, and we renegotiated 300 leases roughly in about 9 weeks. Okay. Wow. And there just weren't enough people around to do all that by themselves. Right.
Right.
Those are moments, those are extreme moments where everybody has to just help. Right. But generally speaking, if you're serving the founder and the CEO as a director, you're not in the weeds, because if you have to get in the weeds, that means you have a leadership issue, right? That's what that's telling you.
Right. So uh, the board meetings are the board member is in one way a thought partner and another way an accountability partner.
Right.
But so the extreme black swan events are rare, and we assume those don't happen as much, where you have to roll up your sleeves and jump in. Um, so in on a day-to-day situation, on a quarterly basis, what does a good board meeting look like? I guess the cadence is determined company to company, depends on stage and many other factors. But what makes a great board meeting?
It's got to be very focused on strategic issues, usually. There are some tactical and operating things that, you can get updates on so that everybody has the same set of facts that they're working from. But generally, the decisions that, or the results that we often praise executives for, the decisions which led to those happened 8 quarters previously.
Right.
Right. That's when those calls were made. Did we hire this person on a timely basis? Did we commit to a new supplier and get them stood up so that 8 quarters from now, our costs were predictable, those sorts of things. And so if your board meetings are focused on, and the timing might not be 8 quarters depending on the market that you're in and that you're serving, but it's sometime out in the future. If your decisions are focused as a board on delivering outcomes that you believe are the right outcomes for the business further out, then you're talking about the right things. And it could be human related, it could be resource related, it could be financing related, but it has to really be future oriented. Because most of the information that you can get about the past, you can get in written form. And so most of our boards now, a lot of what happens that is reporting out occurs ahead of time, either in the form of, like, we'll have many of our boards, for example, do monthly 1-hour reporting out calls, right? So that when we show up and we're physically together, we're having dinner and we're talking about this and we're seeing people interact, it's all about, okay, what are the decisions that we need to make today so that we're going to be exactly where we need to be, positioned wise, competitively, whatever it is, several quarters from now. That to me is what makes a really effective board meeting.
So the board meetings should not be about getting updated on historic successes of decisions made,
you
8
can
quarters
celebrate
prior.
them.
Right. Yeah,
you can celebrate them.
Right. That's a moment to
and
celebrate.
Acknowledging the work and everything.
Right.
I'm not diminishing that.
Right. But you can get updated, like, as you said, on a monthly basis on that, or in a 1 hour, 2 hour period where you get together, right? Or like read a document in advance and, get updated on that.
Yeah.
But then once, depending on the cadence, but once you get together, you're discussing the strategic direction of the company and how it's going to impact the company on a 2-5 year timeline.
Yeah. Or you're discussing something that is structurally strategic to the way the business operates. So I'll give you an example. If I were to ask you for your business, what is your compensation philosophy and how do you execute it? Okay.
Right.
What would you say? Because deciding what the right compensation philosophy for an organization is a really important question, especially as it scales. So some say we, as a philosophy, have a much stronger emphasis on long-term incentives versus short-term cash comp, for example. That's an example, right? And as a result of that, we get a certain kind of employee, we structure their compensation a certain way, et cetera. Others say, our market is competitive in such a way, and the type of work that we do really requires us to pay a lot of cash up front with a little bit of long-term incentive. And others have a balance, right? The decision as to what compensation philosophy is the right one for the business, that is something that you often will discuss as a board over multiple conversations.
Right.
Right. Because then once you design it, somebody has to go execute it. They have to, they have to look at, well, gosh, when we hired all these people, we didn't think of it this way. So we have to level everybody out, and we have to sort of put people in bands that are appropriate for the philosophy so that the next person we hire fits in, and we know how to recruit them, and we know how to communicate what we're asking of them. Like boards are, particularly if they're experienced boards, are very valuable as thought partners to founders. Again, especially if they haven't scaled a business, those kind of discussions are really, really fruitful. And they're the kind of thing that you should have at a board meeting, as opposed to, why is our gross margin 0.8% better or worse than we thought it was going to be? Unless there is some massive strategic reason for it. That's really not what the board should be digging into, because you have real professionals who understand that and can explain it and control those dials.
I'm sure all board meetings throughout your career were not rosy.
No, so, that's true. I would be the only VC in history if that were the case.
What does a bad board meeting look like?
Well, bad can take a number of forms. Okay.
Yeah.
Bad can be learning in the meeting, not ahead of time. We missed our numbers dramatically and we don't know why. Like, that's a bad board meeting. Bad can be this person who we hired, who we think is fantastic, got poached away and we didn't have a chance to deal with it, or we don't understand what it was that drew them elsewhere. That can be a bad board meeting. But mostly, for something to be bad, it's a communication failure first, right? Most experienced board members understand that in our world, you have ups and downs, right? It's not a linear thing. So you expect some things to go your way and some things not to go your way. But if you're learning about it in a board meeting with no real diagnosis of cause and effect, then you're going to have a bad board meeting, right? You're going to have a real tough conversation. Because, it's a weird job, right? As an investor and as a sort of startup founder, management leader, because you are trying to predict the future. And we all know that that's hard, right? You're never 100% right, or you're rarely 100% right.
Right.
So you're going to get surprised. Things will go bump in the night. It's a question of how you communicate, how you handle it, how you analyze it. Those sorts of things are what make for really robust, healthy conversations, and ones that really devolve into, boy, I'm really in a bad mood now. My feelings are hurt. You didn't tell me. So
another thing about your career is that you've had incredible range. We're talking about you serving on the board of a university, and then, you invested in, served on the board of a Mediterranean food company, that I think you described it as Chipotle of Mediterranean food, which is healthy. And
others have said that. I'm trying not to fight that, but they probably would take a little bit of umbrage at it, because they are, they view themselves as
in their own category. Right.
So,
but for the audience, that's the easiest way to describe, I guess.
So just so I don't, split hairs with any of your more discerning listeners.
That's the constant battle between founders and investors. Founders come in trying to describe their category, and investors are always trying to put it in a box and trying to find the right analogy.
Yeah.
And the consumers and the audience are very similar. They're also trying to, box it in. And I guess that's why a lot of investors give this advice out where they're like, to founders, describe the business to us as if you were 5 or 7.
Right. Or they say, you're the Uber of podcasts, or whatever. Right? There's something of something.
There's some analogy. And
yeah.
It took me a lot of time to, being an investor, it took me a long time to be okay with the fact that investors are always going to bucket things, and you have to find a way to tell a story in that fashion, which has been interesting. But on that note, what have you learned about storytelling?
Sure. Certainly
for founders, for investors.
Yeah. Well, everybody has to, quote unquote, sell their idea in some way to somebody, right? So an investor might say, tell me you're the Uber of podcasts, because that person has to go explain to somebody else, right? In shorthand. the way I characterize storytelling is I perceive it as like the ultimate form of peer leadership, right? Peer leadership as a skill is among the most important forms of leadership, in my judgment, in the modern era. So because everybody feels empowered, everybody feels equal, whether they are on the hierarchy at whatever level. And so the ability to interact with someone, even if you're at different levels and there's asymmetry in terms of your power and influence in an organization, the ability to interact with them and to bring them along on ideas through peer leadership techniques is one of the most important skills that any leader has right now, particularly a founder, because people have options. They can work from home. They can do all kinds of things, and they are doing all kinds of things. And so one of the most powerful tools, therefore, in peer leadership is the ability to engage in effective and clear storytelling. So I think of it both in terms of the way founders tell their origin story and the power that can have to motivate people.
Right.
It's any number of different aspects of storytelling, but it's what gets people working really hard when it gets tough, right? Because they have a sense of the narrative of where they're going. It's what often that, along with culture, because it's part of culture, is what does the managing when the leadership's not around, when they're out doing something else. That's the storytelling and the cultural impact on that storytelling has is what's doing the leading when the leader is not present physically. So that's how I think about it.
What are the ingredients of a great story?
Clarity, 1, 2, and beginning, middle, and end, right? Where we're going and why. Like the reason we're doing these things, the impact we're having, why it affected me and why I think others will be affected by it, all that kind of stuff. That's what resonates emotionally. And that's what people remember, and that's what they react to, and that's what inspires them. That to me is those are the ingredients.
Amongst the ideas you've had to sell over the course of your career, what's one that stands out, which you remember, oh, why did we figure out the story here? Like the narrative, like we really figured it out, and it took fewer iterations, or like it took a lot of iterations, but you got to the right one. And what was that idea, and what was that process?
So I wouldn't take credit for some of the founders' ideas that really belong to them. But one of the most powerful ideas, we've been talking about food, so I'll focus on that. One of the companies I backed in the early parts of my career was the company founded by Jose Andres. Jose Andres, when we became investors, we were the first institutional investors in his company. And at that time, he was just a Spanish chef, right? He wasn't the philanthropist. He wasn't the Nobel Peace Prize nominee that he is. He wasn't all of those things. He was a guy here in Washington who had some nice restaurants. But his mantra, and what we really worked on to hone together, was this idea of changing the world through the power of food, right? And the impact that food has on culture, the impact that, because food touches everything, of course. It's, it's immigration, it's nutrition, it's health, it's politics, right? It's farming, it's supply chain, it's all of these things. And that idea, that's what became the inspiration for the Global Food Institute at GW, and trying to educate the next generation of food policymakers, all that stuff. That's a very powerful idea. And to a certain degree, the effectiveness of the sales pitch of something like that might not be predictable, but it's post-dictable. After you hear it, you go, yeah, I get it, right? You really can do these things. All this intersection of culture and everything else, nutrition and health and so forth, can be very powerful. So that would be an example of something that was particularly strong.
What is the intersection of culture?
So you talked about Pakistani chai and the impact it has on you. And you described to me the meticulous nature of how it's made and how long it takes. And you also shared with me doing it with your friends. So it became a bonding aspect with your friends.
Mm-hmm.
And you also shared that you wanted to potentially share that experience with your significant other and others. That's culture.
Mm.
And so you yourself were describing a culture experience as represented by a culinary experience.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
It is, in a way, it connects people and at scale. And yeah, if you communicate it in that sense, the story does sound very compelling and interesting.
And you think about, you know, in this country, we now celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Many people do, right? The 5th of May. That's not a United States holiday, right? But culturally in Mexico, it's a very powerful holiday. And that's a culture that's shared, as an example. And it's around food and the like.
Lunar New Year.
Lunar New Year. Excellent example.
Right. That has also become pretty big, pretty popular.
Yeah,
right. Fascinating. In this particular case, you mentioned that, the founders had a background in running a restaurant, a higher end restaurant, but they had a background. Yeah. How much do you think background is relevant to the origin story? Or to even the founder executing something, innovating in a new industry or executing something new?
Sure. I wouldn't necessarily discount the talents of somebody who, has sort of horizontal flexibility and as a quick study and the like. But it's very hard to substitute genuine passion. So whether you have a background in something or whether you are really deeply motivated to solve a problem, that really has to be important. So for example, one of our most successful investments is a company called Tempus, which is a precision oncology company using AI tools. The founder in this particular case he was not an oncologist. He was not a medical professional. He did have some big data technology chops, but his wife got breast cancer. And what he discovered in the process of getting her treated was there's more precision information about someone booking a trip to Disney World than there was about her health. And when you're a founder and when you're an entrepreneur, that's a problem that gets your attention. And so what helps people fight when it gets hard and stay committed and sell the idea with real passion is having been affected by it. So usually folks who have not been affected by something are not as good at selling it and recruiting others to join them than those who have. And if you don't have a background in some of this stuff, at least an element of it, like in this case, he had an element in the data aspects of it and had a theory for how to solve it. It's just harder to build an enterprise around it and to convince others that you're the right person. And we have had in the course of the deployment of our funds, we've come to the conclusion in a couple of cases where right problem, wrong team, right? Because they may be good, they may be compelling, but they're maybe coming to it second or third hand because a truly motivated and experienced team has seen it. And so we'll either not do it or we'll try and do the other deal, right? That's just part of our responsibility to be fiduciaries. And we may have a problem identified to us, but not have the confidence that it's the right team behind it. And so it's really incumbent upon us to not try and make them people they're not. It's incumbent upon us to really back the right teams if we are so convinced that the market opportunity is there.
We talked a lot about Cava and the food company, but you were also on the board of another company called Anonymous Content. And you briefly served as an officer in the company as well. You gave me a great 101 on how Hollywood works, by the way, just before this. So tell me more about that company. And we were talking about how media and investing have now sort of become synonymous, but I would say they've probably always been relevant and synonymous, and it's just like more obvious now. So what are some takeaways from that experience?
Sure.
And can you tell us more about the company?
Yeah. So anonymous content is one of the largest independent, in other words, outside the studio system, producers of prestige-oriented content in Hollywood. And they manage the careers of the top 750 or so writers and directors and A-list actors. And so they're right at the intersection of media and technology and how it's now crafted. It used to be that the development, production, exhibition, and distribution of content were all separated. They used to be four independent things. So you had independent theater owners, not owned by studios, and the like. Technology has collapsed all of those into one big combined set of activities. And so that's changed business models dramatically. So the intersection between creativity and technology has blended the art and the science of creating content. And so as a result of that, things like the ability to aggregate content creators or to aggregate distribution capabilities, for example, the way Netflix has, right, where they are arguably one of the largest distributors of content globally, with Amazon and others and so forth competing. All of that stuff has upended. And then, of course, technology has transformed the way we consume this content. And so in Anonymous's case, they focus very much on the creator and build the tools and capabilities to match a creative endeavor with the appropriate distribution mechanism. So, for example, if you wanted to create a YouTube series, you wouldn't probably, have $100 million budget for that, right? And all of the resources and creators associated with those who create $100 million budget pieces of content with a limited YouTube series. But having the ability to determine where the audiences are and identify their tastes and to serve those tastes is one of the things that people who are really talented at the business are able to do.
This sounds to me like partially a talent scouting business and partially a relationship management business at scale.
Mm-hmm.
And which is very similar to venture capital, very similar to venture capital. What is something, I guess, that you've brought in from that or into venture capital and into this other hat that you wear?
Sure. Great question. So, again, you are dealing with taste and you're dealing with the future, both of which are ephemeral and hard to predict. So both on the content creation, the quote unquote Hollywood side of things, and in the venture world, you really have to have high conviction and you really have to have honed your taste, what you think will work and will resonate. And you have to be willing to iterate as you get more data, right? So you can't, it's a weird balance between high conviction on something, willingness to be misunderstood, willingness for people to judge it a certain way if they're not familiar with it, and to stick with it at the same time if the criticism is legitimate or if it's really not meeting a need, an audience need or a consumer need, being willing to adjust. Like that flexibility, that dexterity is what is very common to both. I used to work with a guy at the beginning of my career whose formula was this, and I don't know if this will resonate, but I'll tell you what his formula was. His formula was, in order to do the job, meaning in this case venture, but I would say it also applies in some of the content stuff. You needed to be basically, he said, 93% pessimist, 7% riverboat gambler. Okay. And the way he got to the math was, here's how he got to the math. The way he got to the math was, if you were more than 93% pessimist, you would never do a deal or you'd never back a project. Okay. But if you were more than 7% riverboat gambler, you'd do everything and you'd lose all your money. So you can play with the ratios, whatever works for you. But there's some truth to that idea that, if you're 100% optimizer and potentializer, I should say, you'll do too much. But if you're way too much of a pessimist, you won't take any shots.
Right.
And then it doesn't work. So,
I've come to learn now that you describe it, I think I would put myself in that framework, because if it were up to me as part of the investing team, we would make no investments.
Right. Well, that's why you have to have partners.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess this is where the partnership model makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, again, we talked about founders being lonely. If you are the sole GP of your investing decisions, you're sitting on a mountaintop and by yourself saying, oh, we should do this. Or no, maybe we shouldn't. Like, you can talk yourself into either one. Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah.
That's really hard. And it can be lonely.
Yeah. Maybe it's seasonal, right? Maybe a few months you're 93% optimist and 7% pessimist, depending on where you are in life.
Or depending on what happened on the last deal.
Yeah.
Right?
Depending on what happened. There's recency bias as well.
For sure.
That becomes very, very tricky.
Yeah.
Well, since both venture and film managing talent is very relationship driven business. Again, we were talking about before this, how to be able to effectuate change, do things, you need influence, and influence is driven through relationships. What have you learned about the art of building, maintaining relationships throughout your career?
Well, I think they are investments, right? You invest in them, and you cannot conjure up a close relationship out of thin air.
Yeah.
It has to be developed over time, and it often requires committing to it without knowing what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah.
Relationships are on a spectrum from highly transactional to really not transactional at all. They can withstand any stress. And the most successful ones that I've had have been on the other side, of course.
Yeah.
But they often didn't happen fast. They happened, and they often happen through the crucible of stress and intensity and challenge, right? That's where most of them
experiences together.
Yeah. I mean, there is genuine trench simpatico. That's a real thing. And again, if you're going to be in venture, if you're going to be in film and content creation, things are not going to go as planned. Right. They're just not going to. Some competitor does something really smart. Now you got to rethink what you're doing, or some critical person who you thought was going to be on your team isn't available.
Disappears.
They're gone. Like that, and how you handle that and how your partners handle it, whether they panic or whether they don't, whether they blame others, whether they accept whatever their role and responsibilities in that, like that's where your relationships either thrive or devolve, I think.
What is the key to, developing these is one thing, and then maintaining is a whole other beast.
Yeah.
So what's been your strategy for maintaining relationships throughout the years?
You might have to ask other people that question. But I guess it
just happens.
No, I think, transparency is really important, not hiding bad news, things like that. It's really trust. Like, like our longest serving LP relationships are totally based on trust. So for example, in the course of the last couple of years, we've had, like one company in particular really struggle. It was very important to us that our LPs hear about that from us first. It's that kind of stuff where you just don't surprise people. And then of course you celebrate good news and you celebrate all the successes and all of that. And you have those and you enjoy them and you appreciate them. But, not putting somebody else in a tough position because you didn't know something, that really goes a long way.
Yeah. No, I agree. But there's this, let's say there's a hypothetical situation. Well, I agree with you. One, that the best relationships and the best business happens through people with whom you develop high trust with throughout years and have developed non-transactional, genuine relationships throughout the years. But let's say here's a founder of an idea, or who doesn't have as many relationships, but thinks that that they're very capable of, executing this particular idea. Or there's a venture capitalist who doesn't have the relationship with the LPs, right? But they think that they've developed some sort of angel investing track record and they can do it, or talent identifying track record, right? And these people go out into the world, and now they're on a timeline, or they're time boxing themselves, right? That is probably not how the world actually works, where they're time boxing themselves, or they've heard some conventional advice and, they're blocking 3 to 6 month periods for fundraising. But you can't scale trust in a 3 to 6 month time period, right? So, and the other end you mentioned are highly transactional relationships. I don't know if they even convert that fast. Like even if they do, they're probably not worth a lot. Right.
Yeah.
And the high trust relationships are also going to be the highly valuable relationships. So what would be your advice to sort of those people in those shoes, which are many of the people we meet in our industry?
Yeah, I think that when you're trying to persuade somebody, and there isn't a history, you have to be fairly transparent about what you do know and what you are confident about, and what you don't know and what you're unsure about. And I think usually, for example, when founders misunderstand an investor that they're talking to, it's often because they don't understand what particular risks that investor is comfortable with and which ones they are not, right? So, for example, in the scenario where a founder is just getting started, they don't have deep relationships, they have their personal track record and they have the rest. The type of investor that's going to be comfortable with that is a different one than the type of investor that's comfortable with a different kind of risk. So part of it is matching risk appetite and certain types of risk. So for example, in our growth fund, we really are not crazy about product risk, right? In other words, can this team build it? Is it any good, right? That's just not the business that we're in. Our business model doesn't really accommodate a lot of will it actually work kind of risk, real product risk, okay? We are comfortable helping manage and helping coach around scaling risk, right? Market expansion risk, that kind of stuff, business development, like that. So it's not like somebody has to show up and have all of that figured out with us, right?
Right.
They have to be open to a conversation about, here's what I know, here's what my inferences are, here's how we might go validate it, right? So part of it is a matching exercise more than it is manufacturing trust where there just is no basis for it. You have to sort of match where people are comfortable and what risks they are willing to take. And that's a business model issue. It's a business model for the founder and it's a business model for us. So when you have something that's time boxed, for example, like the worst thing that can happen is something that's really, really relatively early stage, coming to us, and we're at the end of a fund, okay?
Yeah.
And it's the last investment in the fund, and we do the deal.
Right.
And that's a mistake on our part, because within a couple of years, people are going to be saying, okay, where's the next fund? When are we going to start monetizing things? And the business may not be ready. So when you have a conflict of business models where my business model as a fund is conflicting with your business model as a founder operator, you're going to have all kinds of problems. And so part of it is making the way you build relationships is you not put yourself in that situation to begin with, right? And if you do, finding ways to like, okay, how do we problem solve around this? Because if like the biggest mistake we make as investors is if we try and impose our business model on a business that isn't ready to do it, then you're going to have all kinds of problems.
I think that is a very good probably description. And I haven't probably heard it in this way before, where you're evaluating business model conflict.
Right.
And And that is your job to do it as like,
Yeah.
as someone who's selling an idea and who's, fundraising or getting a customer,
Yeah.
or just look for business model conflict over other things. And sometimes it's just probably not a match.
Yeah. And so you have to be really transparent about that sort of thing.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up this time, but I think we'll have to do this again. Oh, this has been such a fascinating conversation. There's a lot of questions I couldn't get through. But we'll wrap up with your favorite book of all time.
My favorite book of all time. Well, that's a great question. I don't, I try to avoid favorites like that. Okay. Because I tend to focus on categories, which I find really, really.
Let's do 3 categories this time.
We'll do a couple categories. Okay. So my favorite sort of epic tale, we'll start with that. A lot of people like the Iliad or the Odyssey or something like that. But because I've had the benefit of investing in China, for example, there are sort of 4 epic tales in China. The most well-known one is the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. But my favorite one is something called The Heroes of the Water Marsh. Okay. And it's a tale, if you really want to understand Chinese culture relative to authority, relative to how the society works, The Heroes of the Water Margin, I should say, is probably the best thing you can read. It's a very long, very, very involved tale with thousands of stories associated with it, but it's terrific. Probably my favorite in the sort of business founder epic tales would be Titan by Ron Chernow about Rockefeller. It is a fantastic, fantastic book. And probably my favorite political biography would be the 3 Robert Caro books about Lyndon Johnson. I don't remember all 3 names: Master of the Senate, Path to Power, and I forget the last one, Means of Ascent. If you want to read fantastic political entrepreneurship, that's a great
Lyndon
series.
Johnson.
It's about Lyndon Johnson and how he basically went from dirt poor, hard scrabble to the presidency.
I've not heard a recommendation about Lyndon Johnson before.
Yeah.
Titan is also, it's rare, but it comes out. But Lyndon Johnson, not at all. Yeah.
Well, again, these are superb books of political entrepreneurship and ambition. There are all kinds of lessons about what people put themselves through to be successful.
I'm going to check out at least one of these before we record again.
Okay.
And then that'll be fun conversation started next time. And what's your favorite cuisine?
Oh, Mediterranean.
Mediterranean. I was like, I could guess Chinese or Mediterranean.
No. This is, I grew up in Texas and this is so pedestrian. It really exposes my common roots. But I could eat breakfast tacos for every meal if given the choice, and would if given the choice. If there were not social stigma associated with having breakfast tacos every meal, that would be my choice.
Tacos, okay.
It's breakfast tacos.
Breakfast tacos.
Yeah. I'm not proud of it, but that would be the truth.
Maybe we'll start with breakfast tacos next time.
Okay.
All right. Todd, what a pleasure.
Thank you.
Having you on, and hope to have you on again soon.
I really appreciate it. I had a great time.